I want to start off this morning, first of all, by thanking Karen for just such a wonderful message last week. She, first of all, bringing us back to the truth of drawing near to God, God's desire for closeness to us. He has already drawn near to us. He welcomes us. He's broken down the barriers for us. And that means so much to us. And it's part of the foundation of living out of being loved by God. And Karen, the second thing I want to thank you for is not starting your message apologizing for our mission statement. I don't know if it's just me, but ever since we began going and revisiting our mission statement, live out of being loved by God and the values inherent in it, Jeff always came off kind of apologetic for having a mission statement. And, okay, I get it. I can be really cynical about corporate mission statements because the purpose, a mission statement is to talk about the purpose that something exists. So the purpose of companies existing, regardless of all the wonderful fluff that they put around it, sometimes if you read the mission statement, you wouldn't know what company it is. You wouldn't even know what industry they're in or what they do. But in reality, the purpose a company exists by economic theory and by law itself. A company exists to make a profit, or in MBA terms, to maximize shareholder wealth. That's why they exist. And I heard of one person who was trying to craft one of these lofty mission statements, and she just completely despaired and threw up her hands and said, why don't we just be honest and say we will strive to make as much money as we can without going to prison. That's an honest mission statement. So, yeah, I can be cynical of mission statements as well, but for me it changes completely when I move out of the for-profit realm into any organization whose core mission is not to make a profit. Now, I know some of you have been, like myself, have worked in not-for-profit organizations. And your experience, like mine, has probably been as soon as you take away that very simple, clear purpose for existing, maximizing profit, suddenly, if you have 10 employees or 10 members, you have 10 different definitions of success. And things very quickly start to scatter and fragment. And so a mission statement is valuable, and I'm very appreciative of our mission statement here. It's without any embarrassment whatsoever that I am glad to say live out of being loved by God. And there's a personal reason for this as well for me. Because a little while back, I wanted to write out what I believe. What do I believe about God, who He is, how He acts, implications for my life? And I was getting nowhere with it. I couldn't find an organizing principle that I could hang stuff on in a coherent manner. And then I looked, and it was right there. Live out of being loved by God. And things I realized could fall in place, but I couldn't work through it, live out of being loved by God. I actually have had to work backwards, because how I live is absolutely founded by being loved. And that love is coming from God, so I need to understand who God is so I can understand that love and understand how it affects me and how I am supposed to live out. Now, I can picture it a little more easily as a pyramid, starting with God at the foundation. The question is, who do I believe God is? Who do I believe God is? What are His qualities? Because taking an example such as the sovereignty of God, do I believe He is truly all-powerful and nothing can touch me that He hasn't first sifted through His fingers? Or do I think God is constrained sometime? There are limits to how much He can get involved or how much He cares to get involved. What I believe there is going to affect everything else about how I'm supposed to live. Or is God bound up in time as we are, living from one day to the next? Or when he created the universe, he also created time and lives outside of time. Oh, that one really hurts my brain on a Sunday morning. But the interesting thing is that's what the smartest physicists are coming to conclude, that time has not always been around. Yeah, let's not go too deep into that. And then from what I believe about who God is, now I can start thinking about one of his major characteristics of love and being loved by God. And that triggers more questions. Why does God love me? That links to who he is. Another question is that triggers is, well, do I need God's love? And if I need God's love, what does that say about me? What does that mean about me as a piece of his creation? I can also look at, how does God love me? Do I expect God's love to manifest itself by making my life as easy and comfortable as possible? That's what we think of as a parent. We're there to make our children comfortable. Or does God have a higher, a more profound purpose in my life that floating through with the comfort of a trust fund baby is not going to accomplish that purpose? So from these foundations, I can then, armed with these truths, start to think of, well, what does this mean to live out these truths? What does it mean for me? And yeah, I've been at this for a while now and putting it together, and it is feeling like it's hanging together. No, I can't claim that I understand everything. That would be cool. That I understand everything about God and how he works and his intentions and how I'm supposed to act in every situation. But it really does start to help me wrestle with those difficult verses and start to understand where we're going. Seemingly insane verses like, be anxious for nothing. That's easy to flow off the lips, but nothing? There are some pretty scary things out there. Or, turn the other cheek. Yeah, maybe. How often? Forgive 70 times 7. That's a lot. That's a lot of times. Or be content in all circumstances. You know, there are a lot of circumstances I'd really rather not be in, but you're asking me to be content, and then it gets worse. Rejoice. Rejoice always. Give thanks in all circumstances. This is not making a lot of sense to me if I'm just coming at it from my point of view. Or be content with your pay. Now we're getting a little too personal here. So how do I take these verses? One approach I can take is, well, they're exaggeration for effect. The authors, God, they're just trying to throw these things out there to grab my attention, point me in the right direction, but he really doesn't expect me to achieve that. There's no real basis. It doesn't make that much sense. Or an alternative is, I don't get it, but God says it, so I'm going to grit my teeth, bear down, power through as hard as I can. Those are two options, but by going back, understanding who God is, what his love means, starts to make sense of these things. And it's not an exaggeration, it's not a grit my teeth and power through, even though I understand why. Suddenly there is a reason that I can naturally, genuinely flow in these ways. So it's not just being a good little soldier. I can go back to my foundations. Does my understanding of who God is and how he loves me help me understand how I can not just survive in those verses, but thrive in those verses. Because those verses are intended to point me back to understanding who God is. So all this to say, live out of being loved by God has been profoundly helpful to me. And it allows me to avoid dismissing verses just as pure exaggerations or as just feeling like I need to power through. I'm always going to fail at it, but I'll just be a good little soldier salute and keep on plodding along. What I'd like to do is thank those who had a hand in crafting this and just humbly suggest we can feel really good about it. And it's not just a slogan. It's not just a bumper sticker. And so even beyond that, in addition to just saying how I use our mission statement, let's do a little example just to show how the mission statement can work in. Let's go back to one of our church's values, value number 9. The church must lead the way in love and reconciliation. And that's based on the verse, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Jesus said this is the best mark of being his disciples. This is not a mark of salvation. This is a mark of following, of obedience, of living into the life that God intends for us. This is how to identify someone from afar who is a Christian. We're commanded by Jesus. We're exhorted by Paul. We are begged by Peter and John 18 times in the New Testament to love one another. And it's a wonderful example of how things make more sense when we are building from a foundation of who God is and what his love is for us. So let's just start with reminding ourselves what we're speaking of when we speak of love. Tim Keller, a pastor and author, actually passed away this week. But he had a wonderful way of taking concepts in the Bible, particularly the fruits of the Spirit, and using 3 different perspectives to help amplify what they mean. So when he talked about loving others, he said the definition is to serve a person for their good and for their intrinsic value. They are worth it. They are worthy of us serving them. We're not doing this for what the person brings to us. He also goes on to say the opposite of love. The opposite of love, this one surprised me. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is fear. I don't serve someone because I feel I need to protect myself. Or I don't serve someone because I think I can abuse them and I can get myself further ahead. And then the third one that he goes on to talk about is the counterfeit. What might look like love, but in reality is not love. That counterfeit is selfish affection. Rescuing someone, but really rescuing myself. Doing it for how it makes me feel better about myself. Or I'm attracted not to the person, but to how they're going to make me feel. What I'm going to get back from them. I have loved them, so they will love me. That is not love. That is a counterfeit. So my foundation, as I get to know who God is and what his love means for me and what his love costs, tells me that I now start seeing others with the value and the love that God sees them. So that's the why. That's why we love. We love each other because God loves them, and he wants our love to flow through us to them. So, it doesn't tell us what love looks like. Fortunately, the last 4 Sundays pretty much wrote the content of this message. A new commandment I give to you, love one another. But Jesus didn't leave that just as a vague generalization. He got disturbingly specific. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. He has painted the picture. Our love is identical to God's love. And what have we been talking about the last 4 weeks? We'll get to that. What have we been talking about the last 4 weeks? Well, okay. Beginning 4 weeks ago, we began to learn that God's love is solidacious. If you recall, that's a definition, putting together solid and audacious. So we can go through that. Our love is to be solid and trustworthy. That means God's love is based on his own character. So that means our love does not have to be earned by others. It is based on God's character of loving others. God's love is confirmed in actions and words. What does that mean for us? We set aside our own comfort and preferences because we've seen that in God. We've seen that in Jesus. God's love is for me personally. Our love for others is not a general love of humanity, but we love the individual. Now, I'm going to stop here and put it out to the audience. Is there anyone named Shannon who has anything they would like to share?
So I asked Dave if I could read this because I read this in a book and I was like, that is me, which is surprising because the book was written in 1880 and I'm really not that old. But it is actually Father Zosima, and he was an elder and a monk. And this is what he said, and I saw myself. I love mankind, he said, but I'm amazed at myself. The more I love mankind in general, the less I love people in particular, that is, individually as separate persons. In my dreams, said Father Zosima, I often went so far to think passionately of serving mankind, and it may be, would really have gone to the cross for people if it was somehow suddenly necessary. And yet, I am incapable of living in the same room with anyone, even for 2 days. I know this from experience. As soon as someone is there close to me, his personality oppresses my self-esteem and restricts my freedom. In 24 hours, I can begin to hate even the best of men or women. One, because he takes too long eating his dinner. Another, because he has a cold and keeps blowing his nose. I become the enemy of people the moment they touch me, he said. On the other hand, it has always happened, the more I hate people individually, the more ardent becomes my love for humanity as a whole. Thus ends the audience participation segment.
You know, for the first time, I just wondered if that's aimed at me at all. Oh, God's love is fully is for me personally. So my love is for individuals personally. And finally, God's love is fully informed, meaning for me, no one is disqualified ever. There are no 3 strikes and you're out. I think of the thief at Calvary, lived an entire lifetime of crime, away from God, and yet in the final moments before his death, Jesus was there to welcome him. He was not disqualified. Our love is to be solid. And our love is to be audacious. Jeff ran around the spokes of this wheel, speaking of all the attributes that should be in my love for others, of caring, forgiving, comforting, pursuing. And because God's love is audacious, beyond what we would ever deem justice or appropriate, so I should expect, if I am truly living God's love as Jesus has loved me, others will be puzzled by how far I go. Some Christians will wonder, am I going too far? 3 weeks ago, Bill and Jeff gave us a fireside chat about loving ourselves and how difficult that can be. And, looking into myself, how does that apply? If I am not loving myself, and of course, if I have trouble loving myself, it will be difficult loving others, then I don't really understand God. And I don't understand God's love, and that is not a rebuke to anyone. That is a sign of hope. There is truth beyond this, beyond what I'm feeling, what I may have sunk in. God loves me, and I can love myself too. And that is the hope that we can live in. So 2 weeks ago, Jeff spoke on Jesus' answer to the question when they came and asked Jesus, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment of the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." And they didn't ask for it, but he threw in a freebie. And the second greatest commandment is love your neighbor as yourself, which wonderfully teed things up for today. And then finally, last week, Karin talked about drawing near to God without fear of barriers or rejections. What does that mean for my love for others? Others should feel safe around me. They should feel safe to come to me. James 4:8, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. He's already near to me. Jesus was accused of being a glutton and hanging around with the wrong people. They said, for me, back to, is it safe for people to draw near to me, or do I have barriers? It might be an air of judgment that I walk around with, that I'm emitting, probably because deep down it feels safe to judge, but it doesn't make it safe for other people. It might be a little more benign. I just look really busy. But what barriers am I putting up that might make people not feel safe to come to me and to be able to expect God's love through me? Also, 2 Timothy 2:13, if we are faithless, he remains faithful. After I've shown love to someone and they've abused it, am I still standing ready to show it again? Or maybe they just weren't sufficiently appreciative of my love. I didn't even get a thank you. Am I still standing ready to do it again and again and again? So by looking at God, looking at his love, it gives me the reasons to love others and the hallmarks of what my love should look like. Okay, but what does love look like in this specific situation? There's still the question of how. Now, some of the things, the extreme things, are still always there. As extreme as they sound, they're based on God's character. Solid. The question of who, for example, loving everyone, loving friends, loving family, loving enemies. No one is outside those borders. No one has been disqualified from receiving God's love through me. And my love, my genuine love, valuing them, seeing them as God sees them, loving to them. And there's still the question of how. It's one thing to show love to those in a difficult situation who are in that position through no fault of their own. I just need to be willing to, sacrifice a little bit of my plans to serve them, suffer some inconveniences, but then it gets harder. What if maybe through foolishness or bad choices, they got themselves into that situation? Or through some very intentional sin, they got there. Maybe it doesn't directly affect me. Maybe it has cost me dearly. Maybe it's just been a one-time event. Or maybe it's an ongoing habit, or even an addiction. What does love look like then? In God's audacious love, some of the elements might sometimes seem to conflict. Sometimes God stayed so long in comfort. In the middle of their sins, Jesus was hanging out with what they termed tax collectors and sinners. That was shorthand for traitors, bullies, cheats, thieves, addicts, prostitutes, and all the others at the very bottom of the moral standards ladder. They felt safe around Jesus. Sometimes God's correction is more pronounced. For example, where Paul says, don't associate with those people who are ignoring the teachers so that they'll be ashamed. Well, that's not very comforting. That sounds more correcting, more push to transforming people. Well, that's a while back now, but as we're talking now about the tension between comfort and correction, we had done something similar. We were calling it the tension between acting with God's love and God's holiness. So let's call correction God's love, comfort God's love, correction God's holiness, but it's really all within God's love. We feel like we need to choose one or the other. I may feel I just really want to comfort the person. I want to make them feel better. I want to ease their way. But then I might be missing out. I might be totally overlooking an opportunity that God has placed for correction in that situation. Or I might be more the kind of person of, if they don't have to feel the pain of what they're doing, they're never going to learn their lesson, they're never going to change. But where is the comfort? So maybe I'll give a lot of comfort, but a little bit of correction. I'm watering it down both. And so I'm constantly going back and forth trying to find what, I said was a trigger word for myself of balance. But I'm not going to find balance without compromising, without being less. And so it seems impossible to me, but it can't be impossible because Jesus was doing both. Jesus was 100% holy, and he was 100% loving. So rather than that slider, it's really two sliders. That Jesus was able to provide 100% comfort and 100% correction. Now, what does that look like? It's beyond my capacity to predict what that should look like, which shouldn't surprise me, because as we've been talking about, God's love is phenomenal. In fact, his love is something beyond our human capacity to grasp. I look at this verse from Paul where he's saying, I pray for you, being rooted and established in love, may have the power together with all of God's holy people. I'm praying for you so that you have the power to grasp, just to be able to understand, have a sense of how long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge. We require supernatural intervention to understand God's love. It is beyond what we as people could ever come up with and ever understand. Now, if I can't grasp God's love for me without supernatural assistance, what's the likelihood that on my own, I am going to be able to figure out what God's love looks like for other people's unique situation with the little information that I might have for them? I need to be humble for my guidance. Colossians 1, 9 and 10. This is where Paul says, we have not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way. I've gotten into the habit of using this verse daily and throughout the day if I know I'm going into a situation where my brain power is not going to bring me to what God's plan is. But I personalize it. I say, fill me with the knowledge of your will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that I may live a life worthy of you and please you in every way. God needs to be my source of direction. He needs to be my source of strength. If I try to figure it out on my own, if I try to use my understanding of human behavior and knowledge of what works and what doesn't work on a human level, my chances of success are going to be pretty close to zero. Whatever I do is unlikely to be exactly what God wanted me to do. And so I need to lean into him and put his priorities at the forefront of my mind and seek his love, his guidance, his wisdom, his understanding in going into these areas. Because if I'm relying on my wisdom and understanding, as Oswald Chambers said, that puts me in danger of being stern where God is tender and tender where God is stern. I will be stern where God is tender and tender where God is stern. So, loving others, starting with God. Who is God? The more I understand and seek out God's characters, his personality, his capabilities, that creates the foundation of understanding what that love means. And I can look directly at Christ for some very specific examples of the solidness and audacity of God's love. And then from that, I learned how to love as part of my living, how to love out of being loved by God. I don't diminish those hard verses as exaggerations. I don't just grit my teeth and buck up and try to power through them, even though I don't understand why. Just trying to do my duty. But I come to see people themselves as God sees me, and to genuinely, in that perspective, value them and genuinely love them, want God's best for them, as God can grow in me and through me and use me for the purposes that he created me for. Let's pray. God, fill us with the knowledge of your will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that I may live a life worthy of you and please you in every way, bearing fruit in good work, living our lives extravagant in love, extravagant in joy and peace and patience, extravagant in kindness, goodness, gentleness, and faithfulness. Amen.